Well, it's May the 14th, and kind of do a little update on the recent development here. Particularly, I'll comment on Lis Cheney and her ouster from the conference chair of the Republican House caucus, and her subsequent interview, particularly the one on Fox last night, and other statements she's made. Now, by the way, if you want to remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell for notifications, and I'll and we'll see where we go from here. All right. Well, Lis Cheney. Here's the thing I think about this is I've never seen an example of somebody who had a really good political start who simply threw away her political career over really little or nothing. I mean, and the thing she's saying doesn't make any real sense at all either. Well, I mean, let's look at her background. I mean, she ran for Senate against an incumbent and lost the nomination. And this is before she became a controversial figure. And then she ran for the House and got it. Okay, being a very junior member of the House, she then becomes is anointed as the conference chair, the third highest position in the leadership. Presumably just because of her father, basically, being the former vice president and a very powerful figure within the party. So far so good, okay. But then she gets into this crazy, hostility with President Trump, and is now saying that she's going to do everything she can to prevent Trump from becoming president again, and all this sort of thing. And it's like, first of all, what can she do to stop Trump from being president? Trump will either become president or not be president based on factors that have really nothing to do with her whatsoever. I mean, the issues there are quite different. I mean, can he survive whatever the Biden Justice Department has in mind for him, or certain prosecutors in New York City? If he can survive all that, then he has to make the issue: does he really want to run for president at the age of 78 and serve until 82? Is that something he wants to do? There's a lot of issues about that. I tend to think that if he wanted to get the Republican nomination, he'd get it. I tend to think unless something changes dramatically, he would have a hard time actually getting elected, unless special circumstances occurred, such as they were in 2016, where we had strong third-party candidates of a moderate flavor who would drag away a lot of the swing voters into voting for them rather than a Democrat. Barring that kind of development, I think it would be difficult. But we'll see what happens. On the other hand, I think he has a major role in supporting Republican candidates for Congress, raising money, and providing a opposition voice against the Biden administration. But we'll see again what happens on that. But the idea that Lis Cheney is going to be his nemesis is ridiculous. All she's doing is just throwing her career away for nothing. I mean, if she just kept her yap shut, I think that the whole problem about her and him, they have some relatively minor differences on foreign policy, which largely have to do with how long you should stay in Afghanistan and exactly how active a military role we should take in certain areas, all of which involve relatively small commitments of troops. And in my opinion, while there might be some merit in what she's saying, it's like, why? And particularly, why make it personal about Trump? That's going to guarantee that every hardline Trump supporter is going to want to sink her as fast as they can, and they have. And I just find this to be another example, just like Jeff Flake threw away his career for no particular reason. Mitt Romney, I think, has no practical ambitions beyond the state of Utah at this point. And he may not even get renominated in Utah. I think there's a good chance that he'll lose that too. But he has one ace in the hole there, and that is the whole Mormon connection. And there are factors in Utah that might not be relevant anywhere else. Certainly on a national basis, I don't think he would get anywhere against any of a number of candidates in the presidential primary. And he's generally, his vociferous anti-Trumpism is just really ridiculous. it all shows a lack of what I call pragmatism. The fact of the matter is, though, the big issue with Trump has always been kind of his personality style, which is just rather unusual in a presidential figure at the national level. But I think at the same time, all these anti-Trump people ignore some major things, and that is his accomplishments, which are quite significant. In fact, if he'd have managed to gotten re-election, they'd have been even more significant. But, then again, that's his downside, is that he has created a situation in which he's alienated so many swing voters that it becomes very difficult to see how he could win. The answer may be that if he gets the nomination, if he survives all the hurdles that his opponents are trying to put after him, it is possible that things might become so bad by 2024, and particularly if Joe Biden himself actually runs again, that he might be able to actually win. But I mean, that's a lot of factors. The other thing, like I say, would be some kind of a Johnson type campaign, like we had a libertarian that outshined himself. But because remember that 5.9% of the vote in the 16 election went for somebody had no chance of winning, whereas it was more like 1.5% in 2020. And this actually allowed Trump to actually gain percentage votes over what he actually had in 16 by about over 1.5%, something like that. The point is, he actually gained percentage-wise, and of course massively in terms of raw vote. Of course, the raw vote overall was higher, but it's also interesting to note how the basic percent breakdown has held. And even right now, we're looking at Rasmussen polls with Biden at 49% approval and 50% disapproval. So basically, he's been hovering around the 50-50 line, plus or minus 2%, pretty much ever since he's been in office. So it looks to me like the great political divide is staying in place, and it's what it is. I guess the other issue that we were looking at, of course, it looks like ransom has been paid and the Colonial Pipeline is getting back online. It's going to be some time for enough of the fuel to get through the pipeline to get to all the gas stations to totally alleviate the crisis, although hopefully most of the people have already got their tanks gassed up during the big rush and probably can limp by until the gas becomes available. And that's, but like I said in my previous video on that, I think that what we need to do is just increase our cybersecurity and keep the control mechanisms off the World Wide Web, and I think we do pretty good. And of course, the other issue is going on in the Middle East with the battle between Hamas and Israel, which I think it looks like that Israel's now hitting back pretty hard. Apparently, they were taken a little bit by surprise. My own perception on this is that the political, how would you call it, dysfunction in Israeli politics. I mean, we now have had 3 elections and no government. We're still under a provisional government at this point. So it looks to me like that plus the weakness of the Biden administration and the fact they haven't done anything for a while, the fact that Abbas called off the elections on the West Bank gave Hamas the opportunity to launch an attack and to try to seize the moment and hope to create divisions between Israel and the United States. So far, that hasn't really occurred. I would say that the Biden administration has been pretty weak and also pretty mute on the subject. We'll see how they react as the Israeli counteroffensive gets into gear. As I understand, ground forces are now moving into Gaza, and so that will be, obviously the casualties on the Palestinian side and perhaps the Israeli side will go up. It's a pretty hairy thing for the Israeli ground troops to go into. This is not a blitzkrieg type scenario. This is more like the kind of thing that the U.S. Marines faced in some of the towns in Iraq back during the war, where there was Haditha, and there's another one, the name slips my mind at the moment, which is even bigger. And that was some horrendous house-to-house fighting. And I think that's the sort of thing they're getting into here. A lot of booby traps, a lot of IEDs, snipers, suicide bombers. So it's going to be a hairy mess for them to do it, but it seems like they have to go in there and try to, suppress the launching sites and capture and destroy the rocket supplies that have been provided by Iran in order to kind of bring this thing to an end, do as much damage to Hamas as possible. So that's what we're kind of looking for there. It looks like the Iron Dome defense has been fairly effective. The thing is, Iron Dome is kind of it's a name, but in reality, it's a preferential defense system. A lot of the times when they say rockets go through, first of all, each rocket, each interceptor missile only has a certain probability of kill against the incoming rocket, whatever that might happen to be, 80, 90% probably, something like that. I don't know exactly. And then the radar system in the computer tries to preferentially defend things that are actually heading to, lucrative targets versus things that are heading to, missing and going to empty fields and low value areas where there's no population, which can cut down to some degree the amount of interceptors they have to launch. But eventually, with enough rockets, you can overwhelm something like this. And so that necessitates actually going in there and going to the root of the problem, which I think is now happening. So, at any rate, we'll have to see how that plays off. But Iran is clearly the culprit here in providing all these missiles. And I think all these international efforts that was trying to, push back against Israel's attempt to blockade the Gaza Strip have led to this as well. Well, at any rate, I'll wrap this up for now. And like I say, if you like the videos, please, forward them to friends and subscribe. And we'll be back with another one soon.